Somewhere in the Italian Alps, sealed inside a glacier for 5,300 years, a man was waiting. Hikers discovered him in 1991. Scientists named him Ötzi. Every textbook called him a window into ancient Europe, a people we thought we understood. For a decade that story felt settled, solid, complete. Until they ran his DNA, and the answer was not what anyone expected. For generations, the story of ancient Europe felt written and sealed. Archaeologists had mapped the migrations. Historians had named the peoples. The consensus was confident. Europe's first farmers arrived from the Near East around 9,000 years ago, absorbed the hunter-gatherers already living there, and together they became the ancestral bedrock of the continent. A clean, linear story of origins. The textbooks reinforced it. The museum displays confirmed it. The skulls, the tools, the burial sites, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. Europe knew where it came from. Ötzi fit perfectly inside that story. A Copper Age man, frozen at elevation, preserved by accident. Scientists studied his stomach contents, his weapons, his clothing. They diagnosed his arthritis. They identified his last meal. He was held up as the definitive portrait of what early Europeans looked like, who they were, where they came from, how they lived. The scientific establishment was not hiding anything. They were working with what they had. The problem was not dishonesty. The problem was that nobody had yet asked what his DNA would say when compared against the full, modern European genome database. In 2012, a team at the European Academy of Bolzano sequenced Ötzi's complete nuclear genome, the first full genetic readout ever recovered from a European mummy of his age. Lead researcher Dr. Angela Group and her colleagues applied next-generation sequencing technology to tissue samples extracted from his hip bone, one of the best preserved sites on the body. The contamination controls were exhaustive. Every fragment was screened for the chemical damage signatures that only accumulate in genuinely ancient DNA. Modern DNA does not carry those signatures. Ancient DNA does. What passed the screening could be trusted. The results landed quietly at first. Ötzi's closest living relatives were not mainland Europeans. They were Sardinian islanders geographically isolated for thousands of years, sitting far outside the mainstream of European population movement. His Y chromosome placed him in haplogroup G2. In modern Europe, that lineage is vanishingly rare. His eyes were brown. His skin was dark. His genome carried none of the mutations associated with lactose tolerance or the light pigmentation that dominates Europe today. The man in the glacier did not look like the Europe that replaced him. But the scientific method demands absolute rigor. Ötzi was one man, one data point. Skeptics were quick to say so. A single frozen body found at high altitude could be an outlier, a traveler, a trader, someone far from home when he died. His genome alone could not rewrite a continent's origins. So researchers went wider, much wider. Teams across Europe began extracting DNA from hundreds of Neolithic skeletal remains, farmers buried in longhouses across Germany, hunters interred in Spanish caves, communities scattered from Scandinavia to the Balkans. The data set grew to encompass thousands of ancient individuals spanning 10,000 years of European prehistory. The patterns that emerged were not subtle. They were not marginal findings at the edge of statistical significance. They were everywhere, and they were identical. Population after population showed the same signal. The people who built Europe's first farms, raised its first monuments, and established its first settled communities were genetically closer to modern Sardinians and Near Eastern populations than to the Europeans living on that same land today. Here is what truly shatters our assumptions. Europe did not gradually evolve into its modern population. It was replaced, repeatedly, and the replacements left almost no warning in the historical record. The data came back. The scientists stared at the screens in disbelief. Somewhere between 5,000 and 4,500 years ago, the people who built ancient Europe almost entirely disappeared. Not through famine, not through disease. Through replacement, a massive migration wave sweeping in from the Pontic steppe, the vast grasslands stretching across modern Russia and Ukraine. They were the Yamnia. In the cold language of genetics, it is called a population turnover event. In the language of history, it is called the erasure of an entire civilization without a single written record of it happening. The Yamnia carried a genetic signature so dominant that, within a few generations, it had overwritten up to 75% of the existing European gene pool. Ötzi's people, the dark-skinned, brown-eyed farmers who had built Europe's megalithic monuments, its longhouses, its agricultural networks were absorbed and diluted into near invisibility. This changes everything about how we view European identity. The light skin, the lactose tolerance, the genetic profile that modern Europeans recognize as distinctly their own, none of it came from Europe's first farmers. It rode in on horseback from the steppe 5,000 years ago and erased what was already there. This revelation fundamentally changes how we view European origins. For over a century, European identity has been anchored in a story of deep, unbroken continuity. A people rooted to their land across thousands of years. That story is not supported by the DNA. It never was. The population carrying that identity arrived late, displaced what came before, and left almost no trace of the transition in the historical record. Consider what that means for archaeology. Every megalithic monument in Western Europe, Stonehenge, Newgrange, Karnak, was built by a population that modern Europeans are barely descended from. The hands that raised those stones belonged to people genetically closer to a Sardinian fisherman than to a contemporary Briton or Frenchman. Consider what it means for the deeper question of who gets to claim ancestry over a place. The Yamnia, who replaced Europe's first farmers, were themselves later transformed by subsequent migrations. Europe has never been a static gene pool. It has been a palimpsest, layer written over layer, each one partially erasing what came before. History is a fragile construct, largely written by those who survived to hold the pen. The DNA of Ötzi and 10,000 nameless Neolithic bones proved that the deepest European story was told by people who left no pen behind at all. The bones beneath Europe's oldest glaciers proved that the most earth-shattering secrets aren't locked inside castles or classified archives. They are frozen in ice, buried in caves, and pressed into ancient clay, waiting patiently for the science of the future to dig them up. Thank you for exploring this extraordinary genetic mystery with us. If this changed how you see European history, like this video, subscribe, and tell us below whose story do you think was erased.